Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and I'm carrying on my series for A-level history about Germany 1918 to 45. I'm now going to look at the Hitler myth. So, it's widely known that Adolf Hitler authorized countless atrocities, and therefore was a barbarously cruel person. The staggering thing is that quite a lot of people in the Third Reich thought that he was a decent person and even kind. And there were pictures of him smiling at children, feeding a tame deer, things like that. And people found it hard to reconcile this softer side of him with the savage reality of what his policies did to people. So Adolf Hitler wrote an autobiography entitled Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle, in 1924. And he gave his reason for publishing this. He said it was to counter foul legends dished up about my person in the Jewish press. In fact, the principal purpose for publishing this was to raise funds with which to pay off their legal fees. So Hitler depicted himself as an intelligent and gifted youth, and that's possibly why he used needlessly sophisticated vocabulary in his book and overly long sentences, which sometimes obfuscated meaning. He was at pains to demonstrate how brainy he was, and he peppered the text with literary allusions such as the happy city of the Phaeacians. So he sought to portray himself as being romantic, rebellious, emotionally sensitive, artistic, self-sacrificing, inquisitive, valiant, self-assured, unstintingly patriotic, and so forth. He pretended that he got along well with his father. That's not the case. He said it was a happy house for us children, and that's the only time he ever alluded to his sister and brother, which shows you what this relationship with them was really not so close. Anyways, he and his father clashed over his career plans, and he pretended to have been in relative poverty. That's not the case, and being reduced to working as an unskilled labourer. But really he was lackadaisical, so he didn't do that. He wanted people who were unemployed in the 1920s to identify with him. He claimed that he should have been promoted in the First World War, but his officers disliked him. Well, the thing is, they said that he was lacking in leadership qualities, which is, of course, richly ironic. He wrote extensively on the crucial subject of propaganda, saying that British wartime propaganda was better than German, insofar that it was simple and endlessly repeated, whereas German wartime propaganda had been too complex. He came up with his big lie theory, that the broad masses of the people will more easily fall prey to a big lie than a small one, because people usually tell trifling lies in their daily life, but they wouldn't have the impudence to tell a whopper of a lie. So people have got to tell an absolutely huge lie and repeat it shamelessly, even if that looks ludicrous. And then if it's repeated often enough, people will fall for it. And he proved that that sometimes works. So he emphasized oratory. He said all revolutions had been due to the spoken word, not the written word. Of course, not many generations before Hitler, most people had been illiterate. Newspapers really mattered in his time, but as the radio started, commercial radio in 1922, people to listen to, not just for military communications, that meant the spoken word became increasingly important again. So he came along at just the right moment in terms of technology. The person most responsible for crafting Hitler's image was his propaganda chief, Dr. Joseph Goebbels. So he exalted Hitler, had him shown as a gigantic figure in posters, often scowling. Goebbels had joined the party in 1925, attracted by the socialist aspect of National Socialism, closer to the Strasser brothers, who were rivals for Hitler with the leadership, and they were more popular in northern Germany. There was a power struggle between the two, and Hitler won out. So Goebbels abandoned the Strasser brothers and came on Hitler's side with a vengeance. And one of the Strasser brothers was killed during the Night of the Long Knives in 1934. The other one fled to Prague. Anyhow, he was the evil genius of the party and an exceptionally talented propagandist. Were it not for Goebbels, the Nazis might well have never come to power. So yes, propaganda was part of his official job description. So Goebbels, he expounded the Führer principle, that is that Germany needed a godlike figure for its salvation, and Hitler was this person who embodied all that was honourable and admirable in German people, and that these German people owed their total devotion and blind obedience to this Führer. Now, of course, it's totally bonkers, but some people fell for that. So there were other charismatic dictators around Europe at the time with a similar cult of the personality. So the Nazis were influenced by the Italian fascists. Mussolini had been appointed Prime Minister of Italy in 1922 and taken about 4 years to dismantle democracy. I say he was Prime Minister. Strictly speaking, his title was President of the Council. So the Nazis took these fascist ideas and carried them to the fair. Mussolini had said that fascism is our idea and the Germans will ruin it. Anyway, Goebbels made sure that Hitler was photographed from below, making him appear taller than he really was. He was a shade below average height. Hitler, that is. Goebbels was well below average height. He felt that the public would then subconsciously look up to Hitler. Goebbels was aware of the disadvantage of being short because of that. And it shows you how ridiculous propaganda is and how people will ignore things which are blindingly obvious. Hitler was talking about how blonde-haired, blue-eyed people were superior, and he was neither blonde-haired nor blue-eyed himself. Anyway, Goebbels made the most of what was the latest technology then. He was a master of the screen and the radio. He believed in saturation coverage, repeating a message many, many times per day. People just then can't get it out of their head. It's an earworm, as they say. It's got to be crude, endlessly repeated. So he presaged some of the methods of modern advertising and link it with popular jingles, things like that. So there were posters in the Weimar era showing gigantic figures, these political posters. It indicated that there was a yearning for some titan to save the people. And often it was a faceless figure on the posters of other political parties with a chiseled jaw and all that, but Hitler was actually the face on the Nazi posters. The other political parties didn't have a face. So the Nazis particularly directed their propaganda towards children. Give a child to the Führer was a Nazi saying, as in have more children, but also make sure your children are indoctrinated in Nazism. People quipped, give a child to the Führer because he can't have one himself. He didn't marry to the last day of his life. Anyway, Nazi posters showed Hitler beside German heroes of the past, Frederick the Great, Bismarck, and President von Hindenburg, and so on, thinking that some reflected glory would then fall on Hitler. So Hitler had come from relatively humble circumstances, and he exploited that to the maximum, saying he was a man of the people. He spoke about 1914, what was I but one among 6 million others? And a huge cheer went up from the crowd, as in 6 million soldiers in the army. So he'd been an ordinary foot soldier, not one of the officer class who'd lost a lot of respect after defeat in the First World War. So Alfred Hugenberg was someone who owned many media outlets, and he gave the Nazis access to this in the late 1920s, and the Nazis exploited this to the full. Film studios, radio stations, newspapers, and so forth. They toned down their socialist message in the late 20s so as not to upset the entrepreneurial class who were funding them. Hitler said that he was fond of animals and good to children and that kind of thing. And it was hard for people to reconcile this with racial hatred he was spewing out and the horrific acts of cruelty visited on ethnic minorities and disabled people. Hitler's image became omnipresent. Almost every classroom or waiting room, or things like that, had his image up there, and people were greeting each other with his name. So the Minister for Justice, Dr. Hans Frank, said that love for Hitler was the highest principle in German jurisprudence. Of course, it's utterly preposterous that love for anyone could be a legal principle, but there we are. It shows how ludicrous the whole thing had become. So that's enough about the Hitler myth, the belief that he was brave, that he always took the right decisions, that he was courageous, that everybody obeyed him.